Anything look a little different already? You get 2 for the price of 1. Come on. This is awesome. Asa and I have decided that today we're going to try for the very first time co-preaching. Yeah, but we've done it twice. It'll be good. It'll be good. So this week has been really, really interesting.
It's been a long week.
It has been a long week. So Asa and I spent a lot of time together this week because we went to this conference in Detroit. Anybody feel like going back to Detroit right now? No, I didn't think so.
Actually, a little bit of flurries. She kind of freaked out a little bit.
I did freak out a little bit. Oh my gosh, it's snowing. But it was like one of those weeks where you go to a conference, right? And they just throw all this great information at you.
Much. The best metaphor was we were talking to one of the presenters. It's like drinking water from a fire hose. And it is. It was, but it was wonderful, great coaches and presenters all week.
It was. So we're looking for ways to sort of like help implement all the stuff that we learned. It was a conference about multi-site churches, and there were all these different multi-site churches there, and so we're kind of dabbling with the idea of that and how you would go about doing it. And so it was wonderful. But it meant that we were like cut off from the news and cut off from the world for the week, right? So I got home like Friday night, just dead dog tired. Yeah, and crawl into bed, and then Saturday was like a big day at our house because Monday's Paul's birthday, but we're not able to celebrate on Monday, so we had to like cram it all into Saturday, right? So we had high expectations, little amount of time, and so we were going here and doing that and all this stuff, and Saturday was really, really busy. So I did not check Facebook. I didn't read my email. Like the TV didn't even go on, so we had no idea, what was happening in the world. And while it was great to not check Facebook all day long,
missed out.
It meant that I woke up this morning and all my pastor friends were on like the secret Facebook groups that we have where we like bounce ideas off of each other. Come on, you know the secret Facebook groups. Okay. And everybody's talking about, they're like, oh, how are you going to handle, all this stuff that's been happening in the world? And I'm just so nervous about my sermon. And I'm like, what are they talking about? Right? And so I quick, do this Google search on Paris and everything, and I read up on it, and I go, oh my gosh. Like, whoa. I mean, we've spent the whole week bouncing ideas back and forth about the sermon and talking about Saul and talking about being fiercely devoted. And it occurs to me that this idea of being fiercely devoted, like we're fiercely devoted to God, but so are they. Like the people who did all this terrorism, they're fiercely devoted to God. Right? That's like mind-boggling, and the idea of being fiercely devoted, I think that's what we're talking about. And we're going to draw the comparison about what it means to be fiercely devoted and how it is so vastly different when you're fiercely devoted to grace and mercy and love.
Right, and that's, so as we were collaborating this week on this sermon, and maybe it was a little bit of a surprise, but we think differently.
Totally differently.
Like, what? And so my first direction that I wanted to take was, what does fiercely devoted mean? And so me being the engineer, I like going on, I looked it up in the dictionary.
You like to define things.
Yes, I like things to be clearly defined. Exactly. Fiercely, so the first thing I realized is fiercely is the adverb for fierce, which is an adjective. So we get a little grammar this morning. I'm horrible at grammar, but anyway. So I went to fierce and looked up what it meant. It was some good stuff. So it starts off with it's menacingly wild, savage, or hostile, and referring to fierce animals or a fierce look. Violent in force or intensity, a fierce wind. Furiously eager or intense. Fiercely eager or intense. Fierce competition. Extremely bad or severe. It's like a cold, a severe cold or a flu. For anyone, I know we're all getting sick right now. So then I flipped it over and looked at devoted. And it is zealous, ardent in attachment, loyalty, or affection. So in putting these together, it was we are severely and intensely loyal and devoted and zealous. Fiercely is the degree to which we are devoted. And so we started to ask ourselves, what does that mean for us, for each other? How are we, and ourselves and as individuals fiercely devoted. And so the natural course that this took was our call stories.
It comes back to call and how you're called by
all
Christ.
about how we are called to Christ. And so I'm going to share kind of like the first half of my call story with you this morning. I've shared it with a few in passing at various events. But so it all starts with I was raised in the Methodist church. My dad was Methodist. My grandfather was Methodist. He was actually a Methodist lay speaker. So it is literally in my blood is how I've kind of just started saying it. Very active in the youth group growing up. Grant Magnus, chances are you're going to hear about him at some point because after my parents, I would say he is the one person that has the most profound impact on the person that I am today standing before you. But he had a theological studies degree from the Candler School of Theology at Emory University in downtown Atlanta. Great school. So in youth, we got a lot of that theological base, which I'm realizing a lot of people didn't get when they were in youth. Some of it I appreciated, some of it I just didn't. 7th and 8th graders don't really want to listen that well, surprisingly, at which I look back and kind of disappointed about, but he continues to be a great friend and mentor to me today. Then I went off to college, and then like a lot of students, stopped going to church.
Gosh.
Tragedy.
I love his excuse, though. What's your excuse for not going to church in college? What is it?
My excuse. I realized very quickly that Sunday morning was the best time to do laundry because no one else was. So I would wake up, and all the machines were free because there was only 4 machines in the laundry.
So you didn't go to church because you were doing laundry.
I was doing laundry and homework.
Okay.
Yeah, exactly. See, I was still being good, right? At least I'm not off going crazy.
We'll take it.
So then I graduated. I started to work. And had some things not work out. Later on, we have a nice, lovely figure that elaborates things not working out, and ultimately decided that I wanted to go back to school to get my master's degree. And I picked Arizona State because my grandfather lived in Mesa at the time, and I hadn't, he lived in Wisconsin, so I hadn't seen him a lot growing up. So I'm going to move out to Arizona, also because this is about as different from North Georgia as you can possibly get. If you've ever been to North Georgia, trees everywhere. It's very green. Great place. And so when I moved back, I actually went back to chaperone a youth trip. I totally forgot Grant planting the seed. Sorry.
You're good.
Go back.
Keep going.
So we're going. So Grant planted the seed for me going to seminary because he was always on me about that. So I came out here and decided that I was going to find a church. So I Googled United Methodist churches in my area. Song of Life didn't come up. But that's okay.
We're working on that.
I got here eventually.
We're better. We're better at that now.
But I started going to First Mesa, and knew the very first Sunday I went there that it was where I belonged. It was where my home was going to be. Having just moved out to Arizona, cold turkey. I knew nobody out here but my grandfather. So I had 0 friends. I knew nobody. And that became my family out here. And through that, I started working with the youth eventually, and even got to preach a sermon. But where the idea of going to seminary went from the back of my mind to the front of the mind. I was in a very serious relationship. It was a year-long relationship that had become extremely unhealthy for both parties for various reasons. So one evening I was actually journaling, kind of trying to discern what I should do with that. And I had this moment of, because I journal as a spiritual practice, and so I'm sitting there journaling, and I wrote, I feel I'm being called to ministry. And so that idea of going to seminary and being in ministry went from the back of my mind to the front. Had this kind of transforming moment in my life.
And the idea of call is different for everybody, right? So each one of us, in choosing to follow Jesus Christ, we each receive some sort of call in our lives. I mean, it's transformative when you decide that your whole life is going to be based on love and peace and forgiveness and all these things that are really, really hard to do, but so healing, so necessary. The idea of call is not just an individual one, though. It's also a corporate idea. So as a church, we are called to live in certain ways too. Even as a global church, the United Methodist Church everywhere around the globe, we're called. So I want to talk to you a little bit about how that call has changed over the years for the church. So if you were active in the church prior to 1960, you remember an entirely different church. I do not remember this church.
Nope.
I was not there, right? In the 1960s, things started to change for the church. The heyday was in the 50s, and the church attendance started to decline. People, for whatever reason, started leaving not just the Methodist church, but pretty much every church, right? People were not finding that they were being fed or that they were being led or really able to live out their discipleship in the church anymore. And there's a lot of reasons for this. But the numbers started to change drastically. Well, the United Methodist Church used to be the Methodist Episcopal Church and the United Brethren Church. So I asked the folks at 9:30, we had several who raised their hands. Anybody remember the United Brethren Church, or you grew up in one? You were part of one? United Brethren? No, not at this service. Okay, because we're newer folks. What's that? Oh, your grandmother was. Oh, wonderful. Yeah, those two churches saw what was happening in the decline, and they decided to come together. So there was a merger in 1964, and the two churches come together. But even that did not stem the tide of decline. So in 1970, I'll give you some numbers, because we like numbers. Some of us like numbers. 1970, there were over 10 million members of the United Methodist Church. Just picture that, over 10 million members. There are not that many members of the Methodist Church today. In fact, most of the members in the United Methodist Church are actually not in the United States now. They're like on the Ivory Coast. They're in different places in Africa.
Korea
and Asia, right. They're not here in the United States. So from 1970 to 1984, the United Methodist Church closed a total of 2,665 churches in 14 years. So that's an average of like a little less than 4 churches a week that were closing. But this trend, it keeps going past 1984, and it's not just us. It's not just the United Methodist Church. It's the Episcopal Church. It's the United Church of Christ. It's Disciples of Christ. It's the Presbyterian Church. All these mainline denominations, everything started changing at the same time. So it's not just one message that isn't getting across. It's like a whole culture shift that is happening. Now, I don't want to bum you out or anything, but there have been predictions, okay, about how this is going to play out for us. So some of these very statistical-oriented folks have taken, the pattern of decline, and they've tried to predict, like, what's going to happen to the church in the near future and the far future. So our church, if we can't figure out how to do something different, right, how to behave differently in our communities, how to reach different people and equip them to be disciples of Jesus Christ, then the church that we know it as of right now, all connectional and connected to different churches here and all over the world, won't exist by 2030, in 15 years. If we can't figure this out in 15 years, then we just can't sustain what we have. That means that we can't sustain our connectional ministries. So every month we pay something called apportionments, okay? It's a big, long formula, figures, and all sorts of things play into it, but every church has a certain amount of money that they pay towards their conference. That money goes towards all kinds of connectional activities, including things like UMCOR, the United Methodist Committee on Relief, which is a mission agency. You see these natural disasters that happen all over the world. UMCOR is often one of the first responders in those situations because they already work all over the world. They already have systems in place. They're already on the ground. They'll be there before the Red Cross a lot of times. Stuff like that won't exist as we know it anymore because our connectional system just won't be able to uphold it anymore. So there's a lot of changes happening in our
There
call.
are a lot of changes, but the two things that I picked up from what Sarah just mentioned is this is the kind of church that you and I came into.
Yeah.
We were both born after 1960, and so we have never known a church. We've always known a church in decline. We've never known anything different. We never known when it was at its top in the 70s. Mm-hmm. And it's heartbreaking. We maybe we kind of lost what we were fiercely devoted to and all that. But the second thing I heard was we need to change. We need to transform. The church realizes that. And that was the whole point of last week. Because we are called. All of us are called to be disciples of Christ and to make disciples of Christ. But the question is, what does that mean?
You hear a word that gets thrown around.
The popular word that gets thrown around with that is
Every time. Evangelize.
Evangelize. Yes, I apparently can't talk this morning. Evangelize, which is kind of a dirty word. We don't like to say it.
It's a scary word.
It's kind of scary.
Yeah.
People think of the TV guys from the TV evangelist. Like, oh, it also again, it's like a number game for the evangelist. They're worried about those numbers. How many people can we convert?
But it's also a little scary if we said to you, y'all need to be evangelists. Does that sound a little weird?
Yeah.
Right? Or you might be intimidated by the idea of you going out. You're like, do you mean that I need to go door to door? Like I need to tell people that they're going to hell? What do I need to say here?
Yeah.
It's intimidating.
Well, then you probably relate to a lot as a woman in ministry.
I do a little bit, yeah, because sometimes the word evangelical kind of is reminiscent for me of voices that said no to me.
They can, because
right? They said, no, you can't be a pastor.
The term evangelical does tend to be on that more conservative side of Christian. But one of the things I learned this weekend that I got really, really excited about, I had the awesome pleasure of hanging out with two pastors from Urban Village Church in Chicago, and they are a completely multi-site church. They have 4 sites around Chicago. They're doing really incredible things in Chicago. But they were sitting there talking, and we start talking about this word evangelize and how it is bad. And they're like, two of them stopped. No, we're trying to take this word back because it's such an awesome word. And what it means is we're going into this world and showing the love of Jesus and God and the grace and mercy that he has shown us to this world. And that's what it means. And I got excited when they started talking about this. I was like, that is awesome.
It's the call of every disciple.
It's such a different way of thinking, because you're taking that word that I have thought was very negative, and it's like, that's fantastic.
Yeah. In the same way that they're talking about changing that word and the use of it, we are a changing church. Like, we're the kind of church, I love that this is kind of the DNA that we live into, our church here at Song of Life. We're like very flexible. We're very able to like move with the ebb and the flow, and we can change mid-course, that sort of thing. So I have a little analogy for you. Can we have the bridge picture? You've heard a bridge to nowhere? This is a bridge in the middle of nowhere. So this bridge is in Honduras, and that river next to it used to flow underneath the bridge. Isn't that crazy? That is crazy. So Hurricane Mitch came through Honduras, and I mean, it was a devastating hurricane, but it changed everything, and it even changed the path of the river.
The landscape. The landscape of where this bridge is.
It changed so drastically. The river just bypasses the bridge altogether now. I think this is a crazy metaphor for the church, right? Sometimes we get so stuck in where we thought we should be, right? This bridge is like our churches in the 1950s, which were poised perfectly, by the way, in the 1950s. They were in exactly the right place with the right people. That's the heyday of the church for 1950s. But our churches, like the bridge, they're still there. A lot of them are still there. The buildings are still there. How many of you have ever attended a church that like they've got a really old building or a really old history or tradition or something like that? And we find that sometimes it's difficult to change. I think that Song of Life is like uniquely positioned. Thank you. To be a little bit more fluid. And to recognize when the river has changed, when culture around us has changed, and that we're okay with taking a different step or thinking outside of the box and speaking a little bit differently so that the message of Christ is still heard. I feel like there are things that the general church is calling us to. So I looked up what the general church is asking us to do so that we can maybe change some of the decline in the church. And the Council of Bishops has gotten together and they put out all these initiatives, which may seem a little bit overwhelming. So the first one, I think, was the biggest jump for me. They said, we need to start 2 new faith communities per day. Whoa, that sounds crazy, right? 2 new faith communities a day, that's worldwide, by the way. That's not just like the U.S. or something like that. But that those faith communities need to create a culture of call, right? So we talk about our stories and we hear from one another. So it's really important when we hear from Mike's story about what God has been doing in his life, right? Because there were probably parts of that you were like, yeah, I've heard God say something similar to me. hey, look, I'm not crazy after all, right? I'm not alone. I'm not alone in this. We hear from one another's stories so that we are encouraged to hear the call of Jesus Christ. There's also a focus on reaching out to newer generations, right? So partnering with children's organizations so that children around the world can have health care. Children who don't have a voice on their own will be cared for. There's also an initiative here in the U.S. to partner with schools to end poverty. And most of all, there's a focus on creating vital congregations, these congregations who focus on discipleship, which means deepening your own faith, deepening our own walk with Christ, so that we are equipped to make more disciples of Christ. This idea of call is really, really important to the longevity of the church, but also to our own walks.
It definitely is. And Saul is a great example of this. Just before our scripture reading starts at verse 10, right? Verse 9 talks about how Saul was blinded for 3 days, and he neither ate nor drank. So Saul is an extremely devout Jew. Can't forget that right now. So I started to wonder what is going through his head in these 3 days. As a devout Jew, he started to fast. He's not eating or drinking, because obviously something very spiritual is happening right now, and so he starts to fast. Maybe as a devout Jew, he would have called upon a rabbi to come and talk to. I don't know, but I start to lean to the probably not, because I'm guessing he is very afraid at this point, very feared, because a man who he has been denying the existence of, the Messiah, the Christ, has just come to him and blinded him and said, I am calling you to do something. And so he's probably questioning his identity right now. He is seeking to be transformed, and he's being transformed during these 3 days.
Yeah, and I leaned more towards the other side of the scripture verse, the story of Ananias. I'd love to do more research on Ananias sometime, because he's like one of those minor characters that you don't really hear about in any other part of the Bible. But Ananias receives this call from God to go and minister to Saul, which I just have to think would be really, really scary, right? Because Ananias is already following in the way. He's already a part of probably his house church, and he's probably a leader in the church. And so this is a guy who's used to putting it all on the line every day. This is somebody who risk is just, that it's just a norm, right?
It was risky. It was risky to be a Christian.
It's a persecuted church at that point. And so just by following in the way, he puts his life on the line. But now he's being asked to go, to this wildly violent, outspoken man, Saul, and minister to him. That's incredibly scary. So for both Saul and Ananias, I'm thinking they probably had a picture of the way that their life would go, right, in their mind. What I had planned, right? And then there's actually what happened.
Which is just life, status quo for all of us.
You can relate to this, right? I mean, all know that that's what ends up happening in life. You've got a plan. You feel like God has called me to do this, and then it all changes, and there's all kinds of loops and turns, and then you're wondering where you're being led.
What's next?
What's next? I love the story of Saul in particular and the way that his life changes, because it's one of those moments in the Bible where the change is so big that God changes his name too. Saul becomes Paul. I love that type of story because it's part of my story too. So my name is Sarah, but it probably should be pronounced Sarai. That story is in the Old Testament in the Hebrew Bible. Sarai is married to Abram before he became Abraham. When he is Abram and she is Sarai, God makes a covenant with them. And this covenant is so big and it's so life-altering that it changes every part about them. And he gives them new names for their new identity. So he's no longer Abram, but he is Abraham. She is no longer Sarai, she is Sarah.
And this name-changing thing is very common within the text, our scriptures. It happens all over the place, including to Saul. Saul begins his transformation in this time of blindness and reflection, and Ananias comes and prays over him, removes that, and he begins to be transformed into Paul, the person who wrote all our letters.
But it happens not just in the Hebrew Bible. It happens in other communities all over
everywhere.
The world, the same theme.
I recently was privileged to listened to a Native American speaker from the Lakota tribe that does a lot of work in the Methodist Church. He's up in Alaska right now with that conference. But he started telling the story of Jumping Mouse. And it's the abridged version. Apparently, the original version is 3 days long.
Okay. We won't do that today. Sorry.
So, Jumping Mouse is called to go on a journey. He needs to reach these mountains that are far off. He's being called. And so he starts this journey. And so he's running. He's going through these fields. He has a little bit of food. But on his journey, he gets brushed against things. He comes against obstacles. He meets people that help change him. For example, he comes across a fox who is chasing his tail because he's forgotten his spiritual name. In a lot of Native American cultures, you're given a spiritual name very young by your community that embodies who you are. And that name can actually change. As you grow older and who you are, your identity changes. So he continues through the story of the fox. He gives his sight to the fox so the fox can know who his name is. So he's giving up part of himself on his journey. And he continues, and he finally makes it to the top of the mountain. And the next thing he knows, he's now soaring over the ground. He has become an eagle. And the significance of this is, in Native American culture, a mouse and an eagle are polar opposite identities. A mouse is very close to the ground. He sees what is in front of him. An eagle is soaring high, can see far and wide and from miles. So it's the story of transformation, of being reborn, just like Saul in our story, and Ananias in our story.
When we talk about being fiercely devoted in the church, we talk about times in which life has just thrown us for a loop, and we are transformed the most in those moments. That's when we become fiercely devoted, when we have to trust, when we have to turn towards God, not relying on ourselves. We are fiercely devoted. We are soul.
No matter what fears we may have,
and no matter what turn Christ's lead may take us through,
we are fiercely devoted. We are soul.
We'll continue our time of worship through the giving of tithes and offerings.